Warning: the views and opinions expressed in this program are our own and/or those of our guests. They do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our employers. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Time kills deals.
Let's talk about credit, legal, and other internal teams and how they impact your deal's success or failure.
Because of ego, because of just his stubbornness, he walked away from $4.5 million.
Yeah, I would say an early warning sign that a deal might not make it to the finish line is when you have
Promise I'm not being petty. I'm the one they envy, Brody, moving state to state. Make $1 million out the semi, plus I grind it from the start. I was stacking pennies, I might dip like Machiavelli. After the confetti, who ready? We ready? Who ready? We ready? Who ready? Who? We ready? Who? Who ready? Who? We ready? Who? Who ready? We ready? Who ready? We ready? Who ready? Who? We ready? Who? Who ready? Who? We ready? Who?
So wait, where's Chris tonight?
He's home.
He's enjoying the hurricane.
Oh, because he didn't go to the office because of travel.
Yeah, I mean, he lives like 5-minute drive from the office, but I'm assuming he just worked from home today because of the hurricane.
Oh, okay. So Alan, I talked to him on the phone today because we were just like working on things for CLBA. And I'm like, where?
Didn't he drive to Fort Lauderdale?
Yeah, I go, where are you? He goes, I'm on a bridge. There's a wave currently coming over the middle of the bridge right now trying to take all these cars out. He's like, but I'm going to an accelerator group and everybody joined because they want to buy businesses. And he's presenting in front of 20 people with like LOIs like ready to go. And he verbatim, he was like, I don't give up. I am going to that. I am presenting. That's 20 deals right there. I will drive through a hurricane to do whatever I have to do. I was like, I'll let everybody know. I was like, and text me when you get there. He just didn't text me. He just started flapping off in our group chat. And I'm just like, thanks for texting me when you got there safe through a hurricane to the other side of the state. Hey everyone, welcome back to the BDO Show, the #1 podcast in the nation for passionate BDOs wanting to level up their game with advice and stories from battle-tested BDOs. I'm your co-host, Emily Detor, and I'm here with my fellow co-hosts, Ryan Kroge and Sterling Birdsong. At the beginning of each episode, we're always going to remind you to like, subscribe, and share, and send over topics to the BDO Show at artofsba.com. And don't forget to check out our whole family of shows, including SBA Today, which airs live every week on LinkedIn, as well as our flagship program, the Art of SBA Lending Podcast. Since episode 1, we have been talking about education, educating yourself on your shop, your deal, and your vendor relationships. We literally just talked about this on episode 11, that choosing the right partners to work with is a critical part of your success as a BDO. And since you know we don't gatekeep around here, let's talk about a fan favorite. The guys have had nothing but good things to say about peak business valuation. I also decided to do my own investigation, and what I learned was that the last year alone, Peak did 1,100 SBA business valuations and turned them around in just 5 business days. Most importantly, they're easy to work with. The Peak team is always happy to jump on a call to discuss evaluation. They not only explain how they arrived at the concluded value, but are also open to receiving any new information that potentially changes the concluded value. The staff is knowledgeable, fast, professional, and the communication is top-notch. If you want to be the best, you have to work with the best. It's as simple as that. Reach out to Ryan at peakbusinessvaluation.com or call him at 435-359-2684. Let Peak Business Valuation help you build an SBA lending team that thrives. Today's episode, we are going to talk about, we're getting into spooky season here because October's right around the corner, approval graveyard. Why do some deals die before closing and funding? And why don't we have Sterling kick us off with that?
Yeah, so there's probably nothing worse than a deal that you've already gotten approved that ends up dying before it closes. I personally hate that. I think it's like the bane of my existence as a lender. I feel like getting the approval is the hardest part, or it should be the most difficult part. You've convinced your bank this is the loan that they want to do. The bank said, okay, and now you're going to be moving into the closing process. And for some reason in the closing process, a deal dies. There's plenty of reasons that a deal can die. Some are going to be within your control. Some are going to be outside of your control. We can start with the ones that are outside of our control. So third-party reports. that is something that we do not have control over as a lender. What often kills a deal that's a third-party report? Environmentals. So if you have done a real estate transaction using an SBA loan, you're aware that you will need to get an environmental report done. And if you start with a phase 1 and all of a sudden they say, hey, this property may be dirty, and all of a sudden it goes to a phase 2, well, you also are aware that that is going to be most likely a 5-digit cost associated with it. They usually start at about 10 grand. They can go as high as 20 grand. So that can certainly be a damper on a deal. If somebody has to find out later on in a transaction that there's going to be an additional, $15,000, for example, that they may have to spend, that they were not budgeting for before, and they do not know what the outcome of that phase 2 report is going to be. For example, it could be additional remediation that's needed. Well, that's obviously going to be a problem. I have a deal that's like that right now. Luckily, we are not through approval, but it is a deal where we know it has to go to a phase 2. The phase 2 is being done right now. And they spent $13,000 on this report, knowing that they very well could just be using this report to walk away from this deal, knowing that it's better to spend $13,000 and find out that way, as opposed to spending $1 million to acquire a building and then finding out the hard way. So that's certainly something that can happen that's outside of your control. Now, there's also things that can happen that are inside of your control as well. And a lot of that comes back to setting expectations, which is something that I talk about all the time on this show. You need to know when a hard closing date is approaching. You should know when a contract finishes. And if you don't know that, they tend to sneak up on you. All of a sudden, you can be a week out from a hard closing date and you're like, oh, well, that's going to be a problem because we just got you approved today. And realistically, you're probably not going to close anytime in the next week or so. And so because of that, I'm pretty sure I just lost power. Did you guys? Oh.
The hurricane has struck.
Did we lose Sterling?
Looks like it went out. It's just you and me, kid.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
All right, everybody. We lost Sterling for a minute, but he is back because obviously there is a hurricane. We don't know how to pronounce it. It's either Helene or Helen. We're not sure. Either way.
It's Hurricane Helen.
She ruined.
All right, well, you know what? Helen can't hold me
everyone's
down.
lives.
Helen is not going to stop me from giving you all this content today. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about things that are within your control after approval and before you get to closing. Time kills deals. That's where I was going with that. Is basically, if you are not in control of the timeline that is approaching in terms of a hard closing date, well, then you can easily have one creep up on you, and that's going to cause you some issues. So making sure that you are aware of sensitive timeline dates and making sure that you're going to be able to meet them by ordering third-party reports on a timely manner, getting title work done in a timely manner, making sure you engage an attorney in a timely manner, and then also just setting expectations with people, because sometimes you're not going to be able to hit that date, but you need to let them know that you're not going to be able to hit that date far enough in advance to where they can go and they can negotiate some type of an extension with the seller without it being some type of undue pressure after the fact. So those are some easy, low-hanging fruit items that you can address that will help you save a closing before it gets to a place where it's not savable.
If you're doing everything correct, you should at least get an LOI or a purchase agreement before you even send it into underwriting. So you should have some type of time frame on exactly when their expectation is for you to close. So you should be able to set that up. You know how long it's going to take in underwriting. You know how long it's going to take to get all your third-party reports. So you should be able to say, sir, I just got this file here on the 26th of September, and you're expecting to close by October 31st, by Halloween. I don't think we're going to be able to make it. If you can't get an extension on that purchase agreement, let me just save you some money right now. And I literally just got a call today about somebody wanting to buy an HVAC company down in Florida. I said, dude, I can't close you by the 31st. I can get you a commitment by the 31st. And if you get you a commitment, that's good money on the table. Once we get through the third-party reports, we should be able to close you by Thanksgiving. But I can't guarantee a close by
the 31st of this month.
No, there's only 30 days of September. No, the 31st of October. Yeah.
Fair point.
I didn't even bat an eye.
But I had to stick that in there.
Well, I was like, it's the 26th. That's insane.
Yeah, that would be insane for a 3-day close. But you'd be surprised at how many people call me and say, hey, can you close in 2 weeks? Can you close in 3 weeks? No, man, this isn't a home mortgage. This isn't an auto loan. It takes time. We, like you mentioned before, phase 1s, phase 2s, if it's a property, even business acquisitions, take some time. You've got attorneys that are going to negotiate. You've got buyer and seller that are going to negotiate. And I agree, Sterling, time does kill all deals. I can't tell you how many times I've seen deals blow up just because of the amount of time it takes. Matter of fact, I had one die literally within a couple weeks of being able to close, just because the seller got really, really ticked off. It was a big grocery store deal. It was about 4.5 million, and he refused to give. And this was during the COVID times when you had to get updated financials within 30 days to close, and he refused to give updated financials. And the reason why he refused to give updated financials is because he just wanted to close. He's like, if you can't close with what you've got right now, we're not closing. And he just put that hard line on the table. And unfortunately, because of the SOP requirements during that time, we just couldn't close. And he refused to do so.
How much money did he walk away from?
And that's what's annoying. $4.5 million. He walked away from $4.5 million. We made every exception in the book. We went and got a vapor intrusion system. We said we'd do that post-closing. We talked about getting a lease extension post-closing because that was in the realm. I said, all I need is a year-to-date financial statement and you're in. I could get my final change memo, my corrective action change memo. Documents are already done. Legal's on it. We're ready to go. Dude, I can close you next week. Let's go. No, drew a hard line in the sand and said, if you can't close me next week with what you've got, I'm not closing.
Brad.
So sometimes you just can't.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't foresee just somebody's attitude. Somebody's just being stubborn. Someone just having enough. Part of the reason why it took so long is the attorneys just took forever. And quite frankly, it wasn't the buy side attorney. It was the sale side attorney just taking so long to get documentation, a final PA, and then the amended PA, and everything else negotiated along the whole entire way. We were ready weeks in advance, but it was just the sales side attorney dragging their feet. And he's had it for sale ever since and has not been able to get one person to bite on the price that he had back in 22. So
wow,
yeah, he lost a whole lot of money.
Because that was the height of the market. He didn't know that he was at the height of the market then. And yeah, he probably, if he sold it today, would probably be lucky to touch 4, and he was going to get 4.5.
That's exactly right. It was at the height of the market. He had all the COVID bump that he needed. He had high inventory as a grocery store. It was perfect. But he, because of ego, because of just whatever, his stubbornness, he walked away from $4.5 million literally sitting on the table, stacked in large unmarked bills, because that's how I do closings. And he just said no. It's crazy.
Maybe that's like the whole character thing right there. So who knows?
It is. Unfortunately,
well, it wasn't his customer; it was the seller. But
yeah, it was the seller. Our buy side guy was perfect. Yeah, he was great. Matter of fact, I'm working on another transaction for him right now. It took him 2 years to find another store, but he's finally got one. So I'm back in the saddle with him again. But you get fatigue going through something like that. So he had to take a whole year off just to get his mind right before going back into it again, because this is probably the third store he had gotten the contract with. And it was the third store that he was potentially going to own, not at the same time, just in succession. And it was the worst experience he said he had ever been through. Just the absolute worst. Wasn't the worst issue that I've had. I've had other loans closed prior to closing because of attitude, because of just buyer and seller not seeing eye to eye, really starting to get chippy there towards the rundown, and just because of attitude, just because they didn't like sellers saying, I'm not selling to this jerk, buyer saying, I'm not buying a business from this jerk, I don't trust him, I don't this, I don't that. Blow it up.
Put him in a boxing ring and just get it over with.
And that's part of the risk you take as a BDO financing acquisitions. Anything can happen from commitment to close. Anything from attitude, third-party reports, just about anything can blow up a deal. Find out that the buyer was trying to add somebody on the operating agreement at the last minute at 51% so they can get a work visa because they weren't a U.S. citizen. Yeah, that happened to me 2 weeks ago. Not even kidding. Everything was lined up. I've got my buyer. He owns several pharmacies. Again, buying another grocery store, different grocery store. Has several pharmacies, was going to buy this grocery store to put another pharmacy into it. Perfect borrower, right? It was just him and his wife as guarantors. Cash flowed really well. Everything looked great until we got the operating agreement finally that I've been asking for weeks. Finally got the operating agreement. And I don't think the buyer realized that the operating agreement was going to show the breakout, because as soon as I brought it up and I said, who's this person who's going to be 51%, he just got real silent. And he goes, oh, well, that's my partner. One of the first things I ask when we go through this application process is, hey, man, anybody who's potentially going to have 20% or more, I'm going to need X, Y, and Z. And you just said you were going to be the guy. Even signed an application, our 1919, everything showing it was him and his wife, 50-50, 50-50 throughout the whole entire process. His signature on everything. And all of a sudden, this other individual pops up. Later find out I called the attorney who I know really well, who I recommended to this individual. He's like, yeah, he just told me he's got this guy. He needs a work to visa. That's the only reason why he's buying this, is so that he can get a E2 work visa, come from Canada, work in America, and finally get his citizenship down the road. So again, this goes back to previous podcasts, knowing your customer. Well, it also goes to doing your due diligence. And sometimes you just can't stop or foresee fraud. Fraudulent documentation like this individual put together. He signed applications showing him and his wife were 50-50 throughout the whole entire process. But obviously, an operating agreement is always going to need to be put in your file. I was just glad we were able to catch that before we closed and had a bigger issue post-closing.
So this was kind of like a late warning sign. Sterling, why don't we talk about some early warning signs that a deal might not make it to the finish line?
Yeah, I would say an early warning sign that a deal might not make it to the finish line is when you have either a buyer or seller in the process that is asking for a lot of concessions early on. It's kind of like a canary in the coal mine situation where it just kind of lets you know that person, they kind of have maybe some main character energy where they think that their way of doing things is right. They think that their time is more important. Here's the things that need to be done, and we're going to do it my way. Those are all things that eventually oftentimes will lead to a transaction not closing for some particular reason. We heard about Ryan's gentleman earlier where he got down to the end of the process and he was just demanding that concessions be made that were against SBA SOP. And in the end, he ended up walking away from a deal just because he thought that he was right in the process. Listen, there's no right or wrong when you're getting an SBA loan. There's only SOP and what the bank is willing to do. So if you are not going to be eligible, there's nothing a bank can do for you. And if you're not going to be willing to do what the bank requests of you, well, then you're never going to close. And so people who don't understand that in the process early on, that's definitely an early indicator that you may have a hard time getting to the closing table.
And probably going back just a little bit, spend a little bit of time on third-party reports. That's truly the one that's always everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat, right? You generally don't order third-party reports until you know you've got the approval, the commitment. So that's when you're starting to spend some money. That's when attorneys are getting involved. That's when the dollars start going out the door for the buyer and for the sales side. So at least what I like to do up front is when I take a look at a package and I take a look at the real estate and I take a look at the business, I usually tell the buyer, I'm like, hey, talk to my guy over here. He's a commercial real estate broker. Ask him for a BPO. A BPO is a broker's pricing opinion. I'll take a look at it and say, this building, he's asking $750,000 based on the location, based on the functional obsolescence, based on this and that and the other. I think it's maybe worth $500,000. I would engage this guy. $200, he'll give you a broker's pricing opinion. Maybe $400. It'd be worth it. Have him go out and say, yeah, this is worth $750 all day long because of X, Y, and Z. Great. Then personally, on the business side, I have several different tools that I like to utilize. A discount formula, multiple formula, and a couple other different formulas to get an estimate on where I think the business is going to value out. And I plug those tools in just to see if it comes somewhere within 10, 15% of where the purchase price is. Say the business is worth being purchased for $1 million. If I go through my tools and I can see that it's coming in with about 850, 900, or maybe even 950, which should be nice, then yeah, it's probably going to be valued in once we get it to one of our valuations. But I try to get a lot of that stuff done up front. And then if it's off, If it's off, let me give the example of $1 million purchase price on a business, and I'm saying it's about 850. I'll go to the buyer and I'll go to their attorney and say, look, based on my calculations, I can't see this getting appraised or valued more than 850. I want to make sure that you've had those conversations with the seller, that if it comes in $200,000 less, that you guys have a contingency plan, that he's okay with selling this business, this property, whatever, for whatever a third party goes out and values it at. Because I don't want you to have to go out there, spend $3,500 on a business valuation, $3,500 on appraisal, be out $7,500 to $10,000 on a deal and have to walk away. Because, Mr. Buyer, that's your money.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the seller's money. The seller at that point has no risk, has no money, no cash in the game. So it's good to have those conversations up front, because when it does come in low, when the values don't quite jive, they've already had those conversations and they have a plan B ready.
Why don't we go into relationships? Because obviously this isn't this isn't like a one-way road. It's not just a borrower. It's not just a BDO. Let's talk about credit, legal, and other internal teams and how they impact your deal's success or failure. So either of you can take this. I'm sure both of you have a lot to say.
I'll talk about this one really quickly. So we've talked about deal team and things of that nature. But what I will say is that one thing that I've done over time is I've started to hone in on my people in the process who I know are going to help me get a deal to the finish line. And this can even be as simple as which attorneys I use as well. Unfortunately, I don't get to choose which underwriters I work with. I would love that if that was the case, but there's certain things that are out of your control. But what you want to do as a BDO is control the things that are within your control. And at least at my shop, one of those is who we use as an attorney. I only have really 2 attorneys that I use on a regular basis. And that would be Paul Rush, shout out to him. And then that would be Scott Lewis with Lewis and Cape, or Scott Oliver, excuse me, with Lewis and Cape. So,
we love our attorneys.
those are, yeah, exactly. So, and I know
Lewis
that if I send a deal to those gentlemen, that they are going to find solutions. They're not going to find problems. And if they do find problems, they're going to find solutions to the problem so that we can try and get to the finish line. There's plenty of attorneys out there who think that they're doing the bank a favor by finding ways not to close transactions. That is not your role in the process. Your role is to point out where the bank could potentially have a liability or where you may potentially see an issue, and then let the bank either make that decision or make a suggestion and say, hey, here's how I think as your attorney you can protect yourself from any liability or any blowback in the future. Those things are extremely important. Again, there's not everything you can control, right? You can't really control who your appraiser is going to be. You can read appraisals and you can certainly review them and you can push back on the appraisals. You can't really control much about the environmental reports, although I do have an environmental firm that I like to use personally. Again, I'll give them a shout out to Rob Ludecki and Land Science. The reason I like to use them is because I don't feel like they're trying to find a way to a phase 2. I can't say that for all environmental companies out there. I feel like when some have an inch, they will certainly take that mile and try and get you with a big fee. And as you remember, we talked about that being, $10,000+ for a phase 2 report. Obviously, if you're a phase 2 company or if you're an environmental company, a phase 2 is a big payday for you. So you're probably going to try and find ways to get to it as much as you possibly can. I find that my guy does not try to get to it. If he has to, he will. And he's doing a phase 2 report right now. But I feel like he's fair about it. And that's really all you can ask for in the process. Same thing I ask for my attorneys. I don't want you to do anything that's incorrect, but I just want you to be fair and I want you to be solution oriented so that we can end up getting to a finish line.
And being solution oriented is huge, especially on appraisals. Let's talk about commercial real estate appraisals. While a lot of us do a lot of BizX, like I do a lot of BizX, but the majority of them do have commercial real estate with them. And I did have a transaction just recently, it should close next week, where they had the purchase price at $600,000 and it came in at $380,000. It was way off. And so I read through the appraisal. I got permission to give it to the broker on there. We both read through it together, and they missed a huge key point. And this is what's kind of tough going with large appraisal companies like CBRE and Newmark, is that they just have appraisers who sit in their desk, look at Google Maps, look at permits, look at the city, and then they write up a valuation based on that. They don't actually go out and take a look at the property. They don't go out, do any measurements. That could be frustrating. And that's what happened in this case. They didn't realize 5 years ago, this store had a fire and burned all the way to the ground. and they completely rebuilt it, 1,200 square feet bigger, extra story, complete new facade, new everything, absolutely gorgeous, right? So they went based off of the pictures and they went based off of the old square footage. And they did actually have the new pictures in there, but I realized that they were the ones off of Google Maps. And so I could tell they didn't even go out there to measure it out. And we fought it. We gave them the new site plan. We gave them the plans and everything that they had when they rebuilt it, gave it to our internal review department. They went back, and even then they were still fighting, having to go back and update the value. But we had enough information. They had no choice. They went back and they updated it. It didn't get this full 600 because, again, sometimes working with these big environmental firms, you're dealing with a lot of ego, like they're huge CBRE. You can't tell us how to do an appraisal. Only we know how to do an appraisal. And so when we fought back, it did come back at 550. So there was only a $50,000 concession that the seller had to make, as opposed to, almost a $300,000 concession. But still, the fact that you had to go back and fight it is one thing. But the other thing is that I got with the broker and we just figured it out. We found out why they had it wrong, and we put all the documentation together to make it right.
Yeah, and that shows that you understand the process and you understand where you are able to push back. I think that one thing that we maybe haven't talked about as much as part of this particular question is the credit piece of it. Which underwriter you get assigned can absolutely make a difference in how smoothly a deal goes for you and whether or not that deal gets to the finish line. As I mentioned previously, unfortunately, there's not really much that I can do to decide who my deal is going to be assigned to, but I do know what each underwriter, what their pain points are, and I try and make sure that I position the deal the right way to make sure I get a favorable response from the underwriter. If an underwriter is a more difficult underwriter, maybe I'll try and get them on a phone call with a customer to try and get all their questions answered. Like we have, one underwriter here who, she does a fantastic job. But I know that when my deal gets assigned to her, the 2-pager is coming. It's going to be 2 pages of questions. And I mean, not double spaced. I mean, it's going to be the walls of text. And so I have to be aware that, hey, you know what, the best way is for us to get on a phone call and make sure that we talk through these as opposed to having him do a book report. And you go about it that way, because when people see that big list of questions, they get scared. Right. And so, it's an easy way to make sure your deal doesn't get to the finish line by just hitting the forward button and just sending a big list of questions onto a customer and basically freaking them out and just never hearing from them again. Because they really will ghost you. They really will just say, yep, I quit. You'll just never hear from them again. It's a real thing. So, knowing your underwriter and your credit team and how to navigate that is definitely a big piece of this as well.
I've seen the underwriters send those big lists, like you said, and they're very overwhelming. But also I think we've chatted about this before, when you do get on the phone and the underwriter starts listing off those questions, it prompts other questions that may not contribute to this deal breaking, or it may contribute to the deal breaking. There's so many little things and there's so many different avenues as to why a deal can explode or be successful. So it is good to have actual communication on the phone, even if it's not their style. It just works better. It's proven, and we all know it. So
yeah, I'm a phone guy. I got to jump on the phone, and especially if you get a big list like that, like you talked about, Sterling, let's talk it through. Let's see if we can't whittle this down to at least 1 page. Let me get 1 page.
Ryan,
Instead of having to
But
go
Ryan's a big phone guy because he's a boomer.
his phones still have cords on them. They got the spiral cord coming out of on them. You remember our moms on the phone, and they would just be walking with that long cord all through a kitchen, just chit-chatting with an aunt or something. Do you remember that?
And then you come out the other room going to get something to eat in the
Just
kitchen.
trip over
You
the
get
cord?
clothesline.
Yeah.
Now you get clothesline by that big cord going from one room to another.
Ryan still has the Rolodex, he's like, I got to call my environmental guy. He's like,
Oh, he's about to pull it
"Let me
out.
do that."
Why'd you got to do that?
No, I've
Sterling?
got it at my home office. I do have an actual Rolodex of all cards that I've had forever. It's even got old area codes in there too. Yeah, I've just kept it.
He's
Why
got
not?
like one of the big monitors with like a real like tower, like you have to click on. It's like AOL dial-up.
Yeah.
Hey, until about 2015, I was still using Franklin planners too. So
I tell you what, AOL dial-up wouldn't have done Sterling dirty like that earlier because Wi-Fi, so it would have been connected to a wall maybe.
yeah,
That's facts.
hey, there you go.
So I guess let's chit chat about what BDOs can do to better prepare a deal upfront to avoid issues later in the process. Ryan,
Talk about it. Talk about what could go wrong. That should be the last thing that you talk about after you get the structure negotiated, the pricing negotiated, everything put together. You gotta say, all right, so here's the timeline. This is how everything's going to work. This is what could happen. This is what could go wrong. If something pops up that it's outside of the structure that we agreed upon, that can go wrong. If third-party reports come in low, that could go wrong. If you've got a dirty property, I mean, look, it's a corner, it's in a residential area, and it's got an old building on it set back. Needless to say, there may have been some tanks up front. All right. So you might want to ask the question to the seller, has this place ever been a gas station? Look around the area. Do you think that there's a repair shop or a gas station on either side? These are things that you've got to learn about right now because like Sterling said, you're talking about 5 figures in remediation, possibly if there's old orphan tanks sitting in the ground. So you don't know. You try to put everything out there that could go wrong in your experience, in our experience from listening to our shows, things that can go wrong, whether there's railroad cars, buried underneath a building. I don't know if I've told that story before or not.
oh my gosh, you would have a story like that.
Oh, and so I did a loan, and this is a while ago, and this is also why you use good environmental companies that could always come with a solution. So I had this guy in Detroit own like a 800,000 square foot warehouse, and it literally the back half of it had a railroad track that went through it because he did a bunch of brokering for steel. And so he would have railroad cars come in and drop off these huge, huge wheels of steel. I mean, these things are massive, right? And they would come off, and then he had these massive cutters that would go and just cut the steel into different pieces and then sell them to the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in the area for stamping, injection, different parts to go on vehicles, right? And so I'm thinking this thing's going to be an environmental nightmare. Now, this property had been in his family for years, right? Absolutely years. He's third generation that's owned this company. He's had it since the early 1900s. That building's been there since the 1800s and just been added on to. It's like one of those Lego sets that your kid keeps building on and on and on, and it looks all different and crazy, but it still works and they still like it. Matter of fact, his office didn't have heat, not traditional heat. You could only heat it by a fireplace. That's how old this place was. So we did our environmental due diligence, and I was worried about the big cutting stampers that had these 10-foot footings underneath them and had these hydraulic presses underneath them. But because it was all concrete, the environmental guy said, man, you're solid. There's nothing leaking through, and there's no way it's going to go through 10 feet of concrete. You're good there. But we got a bigger issue. Because this is such an old building, it doesn't have a paved parking lot. You come in off of Mount Elliott, you turn in, and it's all gravel. Well, underneath this gravel, we sonared 8 railroad cars that have been buried underneath here. And I'm like, oh my goodness, 8 railroad cars. Because it's next to, a train depot, and it's got rails all the way in the back too. I guess somewhere down the line, they decided to bury about 8 or 9 different railroad cars. So we had to go and do
in
actual.
Detroit. I'm just gonna say it.
Well, fortunately, after they did the sonar, we did not find Jimmy Hoffa.
What's wrong with
I was
railroad
about to
cars
say,
being under
yeah,
the
I have
ground?
no
just
idea.
Bodies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There were no bodies in those railroad cars. They did the sonar. They did everything. They found out it was good. There were no tankers either, which was also good. So because the building itself appraised for about $2 million, and we were only lending $700,000 to refinance the building and add one more cut. The environmental company came and said, look, we can make a validation that it's only going to cost us about $150,000 to pull all these cars up and clean up all the dirt. And you have more than enough money built into the value, less than 40% loan to value. I think this is something that you can make a memo in a good case that we can still go forward with the 7A loan.
Why do
And
you have to remove
so,
the cars? Why can't they? Aren't they like extra, like holding the ground up?
I mean, sonar can only tell you so much, right? They can tell you the structure. It's like X-rays for ground and water. So it can only tell you the structure, the different types of structure that are inside, but it can't tell you what type of material is around it. Even though we did some testing there and here and there, there's rust, there's oils, there's everything else that could be used to keep these cars going. But because we had such a low loan to value and because it was in the parking lot and this, that, and the other, and they wrote up a whole memo explaining why we have no risk involved in this, we were still able to do it. Again, we had an extremely good environmental consultant. His name is Kurt Chapman. Rest in peace, Kurt. Love you, brother. Good guy. I've known him forever. But he knew how to navigate the SBA waters, environmental in Michigan. Just great guy. So we were able to get that one done with no problem.
Man, just pave that lot and call it a day.
Buck, yeah.
You know, it's like, get all that sonar out the way.
That was another solution we could have done too. He had more than enough equity and cash flow. He could have just pulled it out and pulled out cash and paved the whole thing. But we didn't think about that 20 years ago, Sterling. But then again, the EPA laws were a lot more lenient 20 years ago. So it was easier to get away with stuff like that.
So something a BDO can do to make sure that the deal goes smoothly is collect a bigger expense deposit and get these problems out the way early on. You're going to have to order some third-party reports. You may have some environmental issues. If you think that a property may appraise light, if you think a business is not going to appraise, go ahead, collect a bigger expense deposit, get $5,000, get $7,500, whatever it needs to be, and go ahead and get that stuff ordered simultaneously with the time that you're underwriting. That way, it all kind of comes out in the wash around the same time. And then hopefully you don't spend another 15, 20 days after your approval finding out all the things that are potentially wrong with your loan and the opportunity. So I would say get ahead of it, get a little bit of extra money, order the reports today.
Is there anything else we want to sort of end with or touch on really quick before we end this?
Oh, I think we kind of touched on everything that could kill a deal in closing. You get arrested and go to jail. How could I forget? This is like 10 years ago. We're doing a deal, and a guy, I shouldn't be laughing. He went to jail for manslaughter. Halfway through the closing process, and obviously we couldn't do the deal. So don't get arrested, don't kill anybody, and don't do anything stupid until you close.
They put him in a freight car and hit him under the gravel.
Right.
Oh no, my goodness.
It was vehicular manslaughter, and he ended up going to jail for it.
So what happened to the loan?
Oh, it didn't close. He did not buy that store. He went to jail. He did not pass go. He definitely didn't collect $200, but he did have to pay quite a bit for third-party reports. So, yeah, that one did not happen. Keep your nose clean, guys.
And, that's really just a timing issue, because if you would have closed ahead of time.
That's a timing issue. If we were able to close just a couple weeks sooner, been in the clear. They've been fine.
This is about managing.
It would have been a clawback issue after that.
Do you see what happens when the rest of the boys leave us alone with Ryan Kroge? Like what happened? We just are just like story time with Dad. I love it.
Oh my goodness.
You're both dads, but you're like a dad. You're like a seasoned gingery dad.
He's like a New Balances and tucked in shirt dad,
The
cargo pants.
Why don't we wait, really quick, Sterling, before we end, do you have any crazy deals, like anything that like this guy has, or?
Honestly, I don't have anything nearly as crazy as Ryan does. I have nothing to add to that. I live in Tampa, Florida. It's beautiful down here. Besides when we have hurricanes, there's not murder and mayhem and sonar, and this is like a James Bond movie over there, mixed with 8 Mile. I have nothing to add to
mixed
that.
with 8 Mile.
Florida could never.
And you got Florida Man. You should have some wild stories with Florida Man down there. Florida
Man doesn't qualify. He got bad credit.
Yeah.
Florida Man doesn't get past underwriting.
He doesn't even have no credit. He's got bad credit. So why don't we end the episode with maybe some advice or some best practices that we can offer some new BDOs, seasoned BDOs, just to ensure that their deals stay on track and get funded?
Yeah, I would say, again, guys, the key is communication with your customer. You need to know when they need to close. You need to know whether or not it's realistic for your shop to be able to hit that closing date. You need to know what reports need to be ordered and if you need to order them ahead of time. And then again, just making sure that you are on the same page and that your customer is also speaking with the seller, and that everybody kind of understands what needs to be done to hit the goal in a timely manner. As Kroge would say, pick up the phone. I saw a meme the other day. It said, whatever Gen Z person learns the boomer black magic of phone calls and eye contact will inherit the earth. And so, doing these types of things, it does go a long way towards making sure that everybody's on the same page. You have control of the transaction and that you will make it to a closing table.
My 20-year-old daughter sent me a video the other day, and she laughed at me specifically because it was one of those parodies, putting the different generations against each other. Alpha, Millennial, Z, I'm Gen X, and Boomers. And she laughed and she goes, aha, they lumped Gen X and Boomers together. Now you're considered with the Boomer generation, because they did. They didn't even separate. They just put it together. So I guess, we're that small generation we're lumped with Boomers now.
You'll always be a boomer in my eyes.
Oh, you're so sweet. Anyway, I guess advice, set expectations. You got to set those expectations. Let them know all the bad that can go wrong. Everyone wants to talk about the good. Oh, this is a great property. Cash flow is great. Your credit's good. You got experience. You've got this and they got that. But what bad can go wrong? What could happen? What are the what ifs? All right. Make sure you go over those. Make sure you set those expectations up front, because number one, you might be able to get around it when it does come up because it's, you've already talked about it. But number two, there's no surprises. Your borrower's like, well, why didn't you tell me this could blow up if the appraisal comes in low? Why didn't you tell me I can't, go and kill somebody with my Volkswagen, before I close? I mean, you never know, right? Have those expectations and talk about it up front.
Someone got with a Jetta. That's so sad.
Someone got Farfignugan.
What? Stop saying stuff like that.
Stop saying. You've never heard of that. You've never heard Farfignugan?
I've never heard that one.
I'm a toddler.
Really?
I don't know anything you talk about half the time.
Oh my goodness. These were old Volkswagen commercials where their tagline was Farfignugan.
Oh.
And it means, to go drive happy.
Oh.
Really?
No.
They were like big commercials.
Oh
my
cut
goodness.
this out.
I'll quickly piggyback, guys. Communication with your tribe, managing expectations with your borrowers, everybody. It's just one global, let's all just talk the whole time so that nothing blows up. And that's it. Honestly, that's basically what you guys just said. Communicate, manage expectations, and stay on track, and just don't have any skeletons in your closet. So, all right, everybody, thank you for being with us today. If you guys want to send over topics or suggestions or anything that you find interesting or you want to chat about, send those over to the BDO show at artofsba.com. And don't forget to check out our whole family of shows, including the SBA Today, which airs live every week on LinkedIn, as well as our flagship program, the Art of SBA Lending Podcast. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you guys next time.